Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
Long before it was labeled dangerous, heretical, or non-canonical, the Book of Enoch was revered as sacred truth. It was read aloud in ancient Jewish communities, copied with care by scribes, and cherished by early Christians who saw in its pages a cosmic explanation for evil, justice, and the coming judgment of God. The Book of Enoch was not hidden in shadows at its birth. It stood in the light of religious authority. Its eventual exclusion from most biblical canons was not the result of a single decision or a sudden condemnation, but a slow and complex process shaped by theology, politics, language, and power. To understand the real reason the Book of Enoch was banned, one must look not for conspiracy, but for history itself. The world in which the Book of Enoch emerged was one of intense religious imagination. Between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE, Jewish thinkers wrestled with profound questions. Why does evil dominate the world if God is just? Where did corruption originate? Why do the righteous suffer while the wicked prosper? The Book of Enoch offered answers that were bold, unsettling, and expansive. It portrayed the universe as a battleground between divine order and cosmic rebellion, where fallen angels descended to earth, corrupted humanity, and taught forbidden knowledge. Evil, according to Enoch, was not merely human weakness. It was the consequence of a celestial transgression that distorted creation itself. This explanation resonated deeply with many ancient Jews. Fragments of the Book of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, demonstrating that it was widely read and respected by Jewish sects in the centuries before Jesus. These communities did not treat Enoch as fringe literature. They copied it alongside biblical text, suggesting it carried considerable authority. The book's themes of judgment, resurrection, messianic hope, and divine justice align closely with ideas that later appear in the New Testament, showing that Enoch was part of the religious air breathed by early Christianity. Early Christians inherited this worldview. The New Testament itself bears unmistakable traces of Enochic influence. The Epistle of Jude explicitly quotes the Book of Enoch, attributing prophecy to Enoch as a righteous figure who walked with God. Concepts such as fallen angels bound in chains, final judgment, the Son of Man as a heavenly judge, and the resurrection of the righteous echo throughout the Gospels and Revelation. For the earliest followers of Jesus, Enoch was not a problem. It helped explain who Christ was and why his mission mattered in a universe scarred by ancient rebellion. The trouble began not because the Book of Enoch contradicted Christianity, but because it explained too much in ways that later authorities found difficult to control. As Christianity moved from persecuted sect to imperial religion under the Roman Empire, the need for doctrinal unity became urgent. Beliefs that once thrived in diversity now required regulation. The vivid angelology of Enoch, with its detailed hierarchy of heavenly beings and explicit naming of fallen angels, conflicted with the growing desire to simplify theology and focus authority within the institutional church. One of the real reasons Enoch was marginalized lies in its portrayal of evil. Enoch places significant responsibility for human corruption on supernatural beings rather than exclusively on human sin. This perspective complicated emerging doctrines about free will, original sin, and moral accountability. As Christian theologians like Augustine emphasized human responsibility and internal moral struggle, Enoch's cosmic explanation became less compatible with dominant theological trends. The Church increasingly preferred interpretations that placed sin within the human heart rather than heaven's. Another crucial factor was authorship. Although attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, the book was clearly written centuries later. While pseudonymous writing was common and accepted in ancient religious literature, attitudes toward authorship hardened over time. As church leaders sought to define authoritative scripture, texts without clear apostolic or prophetic lineage faced skepticism. Enoch's ancient attribution became a liability rather than a strength, especially when critics argued that it could not be directly traced to Mosaic or apostolic authority. Language also played a decisive role. The Book of Enoch was originally composed in Aramaic and possibly Hebrew, languages that gradually fell out of scholarly use in the Greco-Roman Church. As Christianity spread westward, Greek and later Latin became dominant. Texts not translated into these languages faded from circulation. By the 4th century, Enoch survived almost entirely in Ethiopic, preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, while copies in other languages disappeared. What was not read was eventually deemed unnecessary, and what was deemed unnecessary was eventually labeled non-canonical. Church councils are often blamed for banning Enoch, but this oversimplifies the reality. No ecumenical council formally condemned the Book of Enoch as heretical. Instead, it was excluded through omission. When lists of canonical books were formalized in the 4th and 5th centuries, Enoch simply did not appear. The process favored texts widely used in liturgy across the Roman world. Since Enoch was no longer commonly read in Greek or Latin churches, it was excluded not because it was dangerous, but because it was unfamiliar. Yet discomfort remained. Enoch's vivid descriptions of angels teaching humanity metallurgy, cosmetics, astrology, and weaponry troubled later theologians. These passages suggested that human civilization itself was tainted by forbidden knowledge, a notion that clashed with the Church's growing engagement with Roman culture, philosophy, and governance. A book that implied that technological and cultural advancement originated in demonic corruption was unsettling for an institution now allied with empire and progress. The Book of Enoch also posed a subtle threat to centralized religious authority. It emphasized direct revelation, heavenly journeys, and divine mysteries revealed outside established priesthoods. Enoch himself receives visions without temple mediation. In a church increasingly structured around bishops, councils, and hierarchical control, a text celebrating unmediated divine knowledge could inspire theological independence. Such independence was dangerous in an era when unity equaled survival. Judaism followed a different but parallel path. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Jewish leaders sought to consolidate identity and scripture around texts written in Hebrew and centered on the Torah. Apocalyptic works like Enoch, which flourished in the pre-temple destruction period, became less relevant to a community focused on legal interpretation and survival under Roman rule. Over time, Enoch was excluded from the Hebrew canon, further isolating it from Christian use. What makes Ethiopia's preservation of Enoch so significant is precisely what caused its disappearance elsewhere. Ethiopia remained outside the Roman imperial system and its theological politics. The Ethiopian church, shaped by both Jewish heritage and early Christianity, saw no contradiction in Enoch's worldview. It aligned naturally with Ethiopian theology, which retained strong beliefs in angels, cosmic order, and the continuity of divine law. In Ethiopia, Enoch was never banned because it was never threatened. Modern rediscovery of the Book of Enoch in the 18th and 19th centuries forced Western scholars to confront uncomfortable truths. Enoch was not a medieval forgery or fringe fantasy. It was ancient, Jewish, and foundational. Scholars realized that many New Testament ideas could not be fully understood without it. The book that had been sidelined as non-canonical suddenly became indispensable for reconstructing early religious thought. The real reason the Book of Enoch was banned, therefore, lies not in its falsehood, but in its power. It preserved an older vision of the universe that challenged later theological simplifications. It explained evil too cosmically, divine justice too vividly, and heavenly reality too concretely. It belonged to a religious world that valued mystery, myth, and cosmic drama over institutional clarity. Enoch was not silenced because it contradicted Scripture, but because it reminded readers that Scripture was once wider, stranger, and more daring. Its exclusion reflects the human process of canon formation, shaped by history rather than heaven alone. And its survival in Ethiopia stands as a quiet rebuke to the idea that truth must always pass through empire to endure. Today, the Book of Enoch speaks again, not as a banned relic, but as a witness to a forgotten chapter of faith. It tells us that early believers lived in a universe alive with angels and judgment, rebellion, and hope. And it reminds us that what was once pushed aside may still hold the keys to understanding the origins of belief itself.